Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv, here with the first of potentially more than one, but at this point, just the one, New Year Q&A episode. And I'm going to be totally honest with you guys. Originally, Michaela and I had planned to do this together, and then we just sort of did not coordinate about like how or when that was going to happen, and we're 3 hours apart. And so now it's Friday morning, and I'm just recording it and then going to immediately post because I'm already late. So that's all to say, Michaela is not here for this Q&A, but we really do hope to be doing more of those. So the more questions that come in, particularly those that link more to the historical stuff that Michaela is better at, we will be answering those together. But honestly, we don't have a ton of questions this time anyway, because despite my begging, you all didn't submit enough. But thank you to those of you who did. This is going to be a great episode, and I hope you will submit more so that we have more questions to answer in the near future. For now, though, this works perfectly because normally I would love to do more than one Q&A episode to start off the year, but this year we have a particularly, an episode that is going to release on Tuesday, and we can all just go ahead and look at the date on Tuesday and think about a certain thing that they never want to call an attempted coup. That's kind of what it looked like. That happened in a certain country. So Tuesday's episode is going to be about, it's with an author who has written a whole ass book about classics in white supremacy. You know. So Tuesday's episode is going to be really good. And then Friday's also, because we're kind of linking it all up. We've got some commentary coming, I guess is what I have to say. And speaking of commentary, I don't know how to catch up with the horrors, so I'm just going to kind of not talk about the world at large because it's sort of the only way that I am managing. Anyone ever been like so burnt out that they don't know how to find joy in like anything? I'm trying really hard. This is a first step. This is a first step because I have been avoiding the microphone and like just avoiding my I don't even know. I'm such a fucking mess right now. But I am here and I am answering your questions, and I am excited for those questions and my need to answer them to fuel some much needed joy. So let's get started. I didn't mean to start the episode that way, but I don't have anything else in me. Let's get started. Oh, also, I'm gonna be similarly honest. I'm not 100% on whether or not I answered this first question. It's like stuck in my head as if I did, but then I also think no, I didn't because of the timing. So if I'm answering this first question twice, apologies. The rest will be new. And again, I have a functioning brain and nervous system for sure, definitely. This one is from Bree BC, who said, "From what I remember from your podcast retellings and the original source, Helen is depicted as being able to choose her spouse. As we all know, she chooses Menelaus. My question is there any sourcing that dives into why she chose Menelaus of all her suitors, especially given she's a rare Greek woman who got such a variety of choice? I won't be offended or surprised if the answer is they didn't care, or we just don't have the sources, or that information is simply lost to time. I just wanted to ask because it's a detail that has stuck out with me in a couple retellings, and it would be lovely if there happens to be more information." Good question, Brie. Good. Which is why I'm like, have I answered this? Because I love a good Helen question, but I feel like maybe there was something similar. In any case, this is really hard because most of the sourcing we have on those details comes from like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after the Iliad, right? We know that there was this big sort of competition between these men. We know who was involved, but generally the details are coming from considerably later, which often means that those details are kind of we have to wonder whether they existed at the time of the Iliad or whether they are being invented to kind of like retcon the story, right? To understand something that already exists. And so they create this story to sort of understand how it came about. But at the same time, I actually think that almost makes it more interesting, because I think what a lot of later Greek writers and mythographers and generally the cultural mythos of the time had to contend with is some sort of confusing elements of the sort of like, I guess, the royalty system, the lineage, and the sort of marriage structure that exists within the Iliad and the Odyssey, because it doesn't necessarily align with the later customs. And I'm going to forget which of my incredible guests first brought this up, because I feel like I've just talked about it in so many different shapes and forms, so apologies. But the thing that is really interesting about specifically the women, Helen and Penelope, I guess would be, Helen and Penelope are the two where we get this sort of, this notion that kingship, even though it's for men, is passed down by the women, because we have to, this is also, it's 9 a.m. and I'm trying to wake up with these thoughts and questions. But see, what's going on here is that like Helen's lineage passes on the kingship of Sparta, and no one can really fully like, I mean, and again, I'm saying no one, like I haven't done like super deep dives on the academic research, but at the same time, I know that it is sort of this amorphous question, because it doesn't really make sense why Helen would be able to marry Menelaus and then Menelaus becomes king of Sparta. Not only because these kinds of kingships are not typically passed down through women, but also because she has brothers. Like, so simultaneously, it's not like there were only daughters and so this kingship got passed down to a husband. Helen has brothers. She has 2 brothers, and granted, they are dead by the time of the Iliad, but she doesn't know that. When we reach Helen in the Iliad, we're 10 years into the Trojan War, and she is hoping to see her brothers, the Dioscuri, right? Castor and Polydeuces. She's hoping to see them on the battlefield. And so we know that she doesn't know that they are already dead, which means that, when Menelaus became king of Sparta by marrying Helen, those brothers were alive. And so we have to wonder, like, okay, well, why did they not become the kings of either of them? They're twins, right? Why did they not become the kings of Sparta? And Sparta has 2 kings historically, not in the Iliad though, mind you, which is another thing that they then had to kind of wrestle with culturally, right? Because Sparta very famously has 2 kings, but again, in the Iliad, this oldest format of something resembling Sparta, there's only one, and it's Menelaus, even though he has a brother, and his brother is also married to a princess of Sparta, but his brother Agamemnon becomes king of Mycenae, and we know that they have some lineage tying themselves to Mycenae, so that kind of makes sense. But then it's still this question of like how Helen gives a kingship to Menelaus. And the same thing, and again, this is not my idea, this is somebody mentioned this to me, but it's really stuck in my head, and I think it just sort of aligns with this question of Helen's mythos, because there's a lot of question marks in the Odyssey about Penelope's status as queen, right? Because so Odysseus has been gone for 20 years, presumed dead. For those 20 years, Penelope has been ostensibly ruling. She, had their son, but he was only like not even 1 when Odysseus left. And so like she has been ruling without a husband, though he's presumed dead. And then now, for the last few years, all of these young men are trying to marry her with the general implication, like I don't think it's ever explicit, but the implication is that like they want to marry her because they want the kingdom of Ithaca. There's not really like another immediate reason why all of these men who would have been too young to go to the Trojan War, right? So they are at best like Penelope's age, because she also probably would have been a very young woman when the war broke out. So these men are like at best her age. They're definitely not going to be much older than her, if at all, unless there's like really like specific circumstances, which we don't know. So these are all like young men who are looking at this woman who is objectively, culturally older than who they would normally marry, because a man would normally marry a younger woman. But Penelope is going to be older than these men, just due to the war of it all, because the men of a certain age all went to Troy, right? And so what is it about this woman that makes these young men want to marry her? Presumably, it's the expectation that they will get this kingship of Ithaca, despite the fact that Telemachus is like 18, 19, going on 20. He is basically old enough to take over the kingship, but there's no mention, there's no implication, suggestion even that will happen. The implication is that Penelope will marry a man and that man will become king. And so we have these two women who seem to be capable of passing down this like line of kings matrilineally. But at the same time, we have no explanation for that. We don't have, like, you know, in the later Greek cultures, that wasn't a practice of sorts. And so it's like this question mark of like, okay, is it like a remnant of the Bronze Age when that was possible? Or is there sort of something going on with these mythological women? Like, what is it? We don't really have an answer for why that would be. But to me, that, again, is coming back to this original question, which I recognize I've gone so far from answering. But this question of like, did Helen get to choose her husband? And again, the sourcing we have in any kind of detail comes considerably later, and even then I don't really think she picks him. I think her dad, I'm pretty sure it's more clear that that her father Tyndareus, almost forgot, that her father Tyndareus gets to pick the husband. And I say that because like there's a lot of back and forth between him and Odysseus about, you know, Odysseus is kind of like, well, you know, I'll kind of go in and make a deal around these other suitors, you know, to the he's sort of suggested to being the one that tells Tyndareus to like get them all to swear an oath to defend the marriage. But again, that swearing of an oath, I think, is more likely a kind of detail added on later to explain why everyone would go to war for this woman, right? Because in the Iliad, like, we don't really get the sense of like why everyone would go to war with a foreign country just for this one queen, because like, you know, as we all know very well, like Greece was not one kingdom, right? This is like one small kingdom whose queen was taken to Troy. And so, but why would the entirety of the Greek world go to war over that? And again, it's this thing where we are working with a cultural like memory within this poem that exists from a time before anything else from that culture. So then everything else is like a way of trying to understand that. And so I think that's kind of what we're getting at with these stories of the suitors, of Helen, and, you know, even Penelope, is this like later attempt to understand what was already going on there. And I think that what's most likely is that it's this way for later Greek cultures whose customs were very different from the ones that they see in the cultural touchstone that is Homer. Like, their cultures are very different. And so instead what they're trying to do is understand how that happened, or what those differences are, or just like sort of play around with the details in order to make them fit the culture of, you know, 400 or 500 years later, when the Iliad is like the text that explains your culture, but also at the same time like seems to point to a quite different elements culturally, right? So it's just sort of this really convoluted but incredible. So the answer is really like, I don't really think that she explicitly does get to choose, but I don't think that makes her any less interesting or less impactful because of everything I've just said, right? Because of this sort of idea of the kingship getting passed down through her. Like, there is an implication that queens carry considerably more political weight in the time of Homer than they necessarily did later. And so then it's everyone trying to figure out what's going on. And at the same time, even if the bare minimum is that she does get to pick, I think that we're looking at the situation of her being considered this also like most beautiful. And she's a princess. She's a princess of Sparta. She, gets to pass down this line. So even if she gets to choose, it's because of all of those things. That's not to say that women generally didn't get to choose or ever did, just that there is like minimal evidence. But again, I don't think that like devalues or diminishes the overall importance of someone like Helen or women in general, obviously. But just like it's an interesting way of looking at her story, with all of this in mind. Okay, that was so rambly and I loved it. And again, thank you all. This is filling me with the lust for life and mythos that I needed. Just had to force myself to actually plug in a microphone because, the anxiety is so real. Okay, the next one is coming from Inka. Okay, Inka says she's a huge fan from Finland, which, so cool. Thank you. Also, a synchronized skater. And our team theme this season is Scales of Justice, telling the story of Themis, or Justitia. I don't know how to pronounce it, Latin. I'm the designated myth nerd and also one of the captains on our team, so basically all questions are usually answered by me. Sadly, I don't know much about Themis besides the usual information. I was thinking if you could maybe do a mini myth about her or point out a good book. Okay, I think that's so cool. I'm obsessed with synchronized skating, so thank you. As a Canadian, I don't do cold weather sports, but I do watch them. I went to hockey just the other night. In any case, okay, so this is going to be one of those times where I give you a really disappointing answer, but Themis is one of these examples where she exists more as a concept than a character. That said, we do know she's meant to be this like Titan, this really early goddess, and I think she's considered one of Zeus's quote-unquote first wives, i.e. just like one of the first women he impregnated, and then they say wives a lot, which is lovely, but we don't assume that he actually like formally married anyone before Hera. In any case, Themis is one of those, but she's also often connected with like these earlier notions of an oracle, like a pre-Apollonian oracle. And so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's like a lot of links to her and the general site of Delphi, as well as this sort of like, I don't recall if I'm misremembering that it's like older or not, but there's the on the site, so Delphi is all like nestled into a mountainside on Mount Parnassus, right? It's like really high up. The view is unfucking believable. Delphi should be bucket list if it's not for you all already. But there's like the main site, which is the Sanctuary of Apollo, enormous, sprawling. And then there's a little bit lower down the mountain is this other site called the Temple of Athena Pronaia, or like this, it's just sort of a separate sanctuary area. And if I'm not mistaken, Themis was heavily linked to that and this like older oracle idea. So I think the most interesting thing about her to me is how she kind of might fit in with this, not necessarily an earlier mother goddess, but the idea of a more primordial, powerful goddess, and just the general idea that women and goddesses generally used to hold more influence and sway than the gods. We know that from an actual historical perspective, the oracle is older than Apollo, not older than like the god Apollo, but older than the idea of Apollo controlling oracles and prophecy. And Themis, I believe, is the one who's kind of at the heart of that more ancient idea of oracles. And I say all of that, and then I'm like, Themis doesn't really fit that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, and I should probably just check it. But guess what? It is January 2nd at 9:30 in the morning, and I'm just getting all of this out to you all. So I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, but it's generally, she just overall though is one of these goddesses where she represents just justice, this idea of law, order, justice, and sort of a like, I think justice, we need to think about it more as a like ancient cultural concept than what we think of now, right? Like we're talking about like a sense of balance. Like that's what the scales mean, right? Balance in the world, in society, in nature, balance. That's what it means to be this level of justice. It's just balance and keeping everything, I'm just going to say balance again. But yeah, that's kind of where she is coming from, because she predates, the Greek systems of law and order that we know of now. She is sort of just this, is coming before those notions. Not to say that other cultures didn't have like very explicit like code of Hammurabi, I know, but the Greeks were coming at it later. And Themis, I think is just sort of representing that universal balance, that earthly balance. She's heavily tied to Gaia, to these generally more powerful and later sort of put down goddesses. We got another one from Bree. They said, have you considered covering late reception of ancient myths? Also, I know it was a different Bree. Sorry, different Bree, who said, some, while written well after conversion to Christianity, seem to have deeper roots beyond superficial connections, particularly the Brythonic sequel to the Aeneid. Do you mean Byronic? I imagine. Anyway, to the Aeneid and the Frankish claims to the Trojan kingship. So no, I haven't. But that's not to say that I'm not. I don't know. These are things. The simple answer is, I am so open to having experts come on and tell me about this stuff, but I am personally not interested in late antiquity. I'm just not. I don't care about late antiquity. That's not to say it's not valid or interesting or important. It's not for me. But if I hear of people, if someone wants to come on and tell me about Frankish claims to Trojan kinship, because I didn't have any idea, come on over. Come on down. Or the sequel to the Aeneid. Yeah. I'm absolutely down to learn that from other people, but it's not something that I care enough to research on my own. I'm just deciding whether to say that word, but it's just true. I joke that anything post-Hellenistic, I'm barely interested. And that's only in the way that I want other people to come tell me about it. But when it comes to learning it on my own like special interest, we're talking classical and pre-classical. That's the way we are. That's the way we live. Okay, next up from Alexandria, who said, hello, we met at London and I had the walking stick. Hi. Hi. I don't remember anything. I was in a fugue state, but hi, thank you. Okay, continue on. It was cool. Anyway, my ADHD autistic brain has got stuck on Dionysus. Relatable. My fave male, rep god anyway, and his origin story. Like, do we think India and Shiva, aren't they similar? I mean, the chaos liberation. We all know as great as the ancient Greeks are, they were all about taking from others and pretending it's theirs to make life easier for people. Right. So, Mr. D coming from India seems plausible. I don't even know what my question is. Haha. Anyway, ciao. Honestly, I liked this one because while it wasn't a question, it's food for thought. So here's what I kind of think is going on here. I don't think that Dionysus is coming directly from Indian culture mythos. And here's why. Because we don't have any evidence that the Greeks were in contact with the people of India before Alexander the Great. But that said, I think a lot of later mythos does absolutely come from India. And I say that because while I honestly I don't know anything about Indian mythology, so I won't pretend that I do. But Dionysus in later myths goes to India and comes back and is like the Eastern god. And he I don't know that he's riding an elephant, but I believe there's elephants involved. He might ride a war elephant. Dionysus's ties to India are very strong. They're just quite late. They are post Alexander the Great, just generally Hellenistic period and into later antiquity. And so that doesn't make them more or like any less valid, but I think it's just a nature of the Dionysus we are looking at now has influence from India, but the Dionysus from, say the classical period, the Dionysus of the playwrights does not have influence from India, if that makes sense. He has influence from like a lot of other Eastern, just not quite so far southeast, a lot of West Asia, a lot of West Asian influence, a lot of influence from the Levant and North Egypt, North Africa. And so there is like heavy influence from kind of all over, but definitely if you were talking about a Dionysus from like sort of the totality of Greek mythos, then yes, there are some ties with India, but like they're coming from later and then are being, pulled through in these sort of different teasing ways, so it's just they're the chaos. I mean, the chaos, that's the thing, chaos and liberation, that is all coming. Liberation is not like a later concept, but this, like, there is a Dionysus who is also heavily influenced by like the Orphic mythos, which has a lot more chaotic energy, a lot more chaotic mythology, just like a lot more explicit chaos. And so I think that is kind of getting pulled in here too, is that there is this like Dionysus that is also like Zagreus, who is very Orphic and very like different from the sort of traditional mythos. And again, Orphic is pretty late. It was popular quite late. So even if it does come from an earlier time, like the snowball was snowballing, considerably late. And so I think that then again, we still have these, there's still like something to be said for these connections to India with Dionysus, but it is simultaneously coming from this later time and then being kind of blended in with these earlier forms of Dionysus who did have very heavy influence from West Asia, but not necessarily India specifically, because it was another few hundred years before the Greeks were officially in contact with India. And then you like know it, because the second they've been in contact with India, they're like, have you heard of these elephants, guys? Because let me tell you about elephants. And then suddenly elephants are in all their stories, So it's really fascinating, but at the same time, you're like, we would know if there was very early influence from India, because there would be signs, and they would probably be elephantine signs. Next up from Rachel from Olympia, who said, my question is about your Odyssey for kids because I'm so excited to get it for my little goblin. That's what I call my cat. Do you think not being super fond of children helps you write for them? This one made me laugh the second it came in through my email. I was like, this is delightful. I've noticed when you talk about this project that you're adamant about not treating the audience like they're not able to handle it just because they're young. You seem to take them more seriously than other more kid-focused writers, and I'm interested in your perspective. I respect and appreciate the hell out of it. Yeah, I mean, I hope that it... Like, I definitely think that is part of it. Like, I don't know how to interact with children, so I won't treat them like children. And so, I have editors to make it all very kid-friendly and stuff and tell me when I'm using words that are too big or... Because, gosh, I have no idea. But yeah, I think the fact that I feel so strongly about the, like... I don't even know how, because I don't want to talk about like the accuracy of mythology, because that's so subjective, and I don't want to suggest that like these other versions are not accurate, but it just tends to be like, from the stuff I've seen, there just tends to be this like sugarcoating of it for kids that then fundamentally changes the story, and that to me is just like disappointing. Like, I think we don't have to do that. I think that we can convey these stories as they existed in the ancient world, and just how the ancient world, the ancient people understood them, but while making them appropriate for children. Like, I'm really proud to say that my Odyssey does not lose any of the major Odyssey plot points or structure or tragedies. The only major element that I have consciously cut out is that the Odyssey is like absurdly where we get that really long like side quest into the story of Aphrodite and Ares, and like the way when they got caught fucking by Hephaestus and the sun and like all of that stuff, like that I cut out. But otherwise, and like as much as I would love not to, but I mean it like word count was the main issue, but then also like, okay, well, how do we make that friendly for kids? Because they were like naked in a net. But no, like that's the only thing I've cut out knowingly or like consciously. Whereas everything else, like I've made, kid friendly, shorter, so much shorter. And like we've changed kind of how it's not like explicitly gory necessarily, but like the big beats are in there. The crimes of Odysseus are in there. The lies of Odysseus are in there. And I don't think that it makes him any less appealing as a character or like interesting or like up for appreciation. I just think it makes it more true to the ancient world, which is that like these stories weren't meant to be about these like amazing people who just did amazing things and were amazing and did no wrong. Like that's not the point, right? And I think that is so interesting, and I don't understand why that is not conveyed to kids more. Like, why do we have to make these people into these like beacons of good? Because I think that fundamentally affects how we see them later in life, and then therefore how we see culture writ large. And like obviously from a patriarchal perspective, like putting these men on this modern pedestal that is like entirely invented by this modern mentality of like valorizing dudes for just duding, like, I just don't think that it benefits anybody. And so I think I'm at this point, I'm at the like nearing the last edits, and I'm so scared. I'm so scared. Just because I have unhinged levels of anxiety, and somehow I think that I'm going to release this children's book and that like Emily Wilson herself is going to come and tell me I did a horrible job or something. None of that's going to happen. But I just think we need to be honest with kids about the ancient world, because the ancient world impacts every single goddamn thing about our life now. And so if we come at it as this like place that never did anything wrong and where the people should be perfectly emulated for all of their heroic acts and for their contributions to quote unquote Western society, like I just don't, that doesn't benefit anyone. It only benefits Western supremacy, and it's pointless and stupid. And so I just wanted to set about like not doing that. And in the process, I am really confident that I have written an adaptation of the Odyssey that is true to the Homeric texts, true to the ancient cultures and sources, and also like honest and fun for kids and beautifully illustrated. And I'm just, I'm so excited. I'm so scared. I'm so excited. I'm so scared, I guess is the story there. But I really do think it's going to be really good. It's just scary. Okay, next from Amelia, who says, I hope you haven't been asked this because I'm only in February 2021, but have you seen The Magicians? I was wondering what your thoughts are on it. They refer to Dionysus by his Roman name, Bacchus, but they refer to Iris as her Greek name. Do you have any comments on this? I'm going to be disappointing. I've not seen The Magicians. I just wanted to make sure I read this question out because I want to correct something that I know I did years ago. This is all my fault. The name Bacchus is not explicitly Roman. The name Bacchus comes very much from Greek as well. There are obviously some gods who have very explicitly Roman names which don't have connections to Greek, Minerva being a really big one. But Bacchus is not one. Bacchus is definitely ancient Greek as well, as is Pluto for Hades. And so that's all just to say that, like, if they are saying Iris, who also, I don't know, this made me think, like, I don't know if Iris has a Roman equivalent. I don't think so. Like, there's a messenger, but it's, unless there's a woman, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to look it up. But if any Romanists want to tell me about the Roman version of Iris, you go ahead and let me know. But this is all to say that that's not really like it's not really like mixing anything up by saying Bacchus and Iris. It's just two Greek forms. Dionysus has like a bazillion names that are all very Greek. He only has one off the top of my head that is explicitly Roman and is not from Greek at all, and that's Liber. So if you say Liber, like Liber, that's going to be like heckin' Roman. It means free. It's very Roman. It tends to like represent this like kind of very different, like a much less exciting version of Dionysus. So I'm not a big fan of it. But Dionysus, Bacchus, something similar. Anyway, there are literally so many names. There are so many names for Dionysus. It's really hard to keep track. It's kind of his thing, but that's all to say, Bacchus is also very Greek. Next up, Chantal with another simple one, which I'm excited to be asked about. Chantal says, I really love your podcast, and it really helps get started with my day. Thank you. Keep going. Yesterday, I discovered that there exists the goddess of war and bloodshed named Enyo. Could you talk about her? Yes and no. Enyo is a great example, once again, of a goddess who is more of a concept than a character. But also, I believe Enyo is also sometimes one of the Grey. Yeah, the Pemfredo, Enyo. What's the last one? Anyway, Enyo, yes, does represent war and bloodshed. She's not, she doesn't appear much at all, honestly, because she really is more of this like a concept of this notion. She is somewhat similar to Eris in that way, right, strife. But at the same time, Eris at least has the story of the Golden Apple and the Trojan War and the Judgment of Paris and all of that, whereas Enyo really doesn't. If I'm not mistaken, which I don't believe I am, there are no stories that like feature Enyo as like a main character. She's probably referenced here or there, but even still, like, she represents this really specific part of war and bloodshed, and it's like the bloodshed, like the real violence of it, because Ares specifically represents the violence of war and that kind of concept, but Enyo is like specific. So that's all to say, yes, there is a goddess of war and bloodshed. Her name is Enyo. She does not really appear anywhere. The name Enyo is also sometimes one of the Grey, who are like sisters of the Gorgons. They share the eye and the tooth because we love that for them. So sometimes it's one of her names as well, which I imagine they're all very connected with the general framing of this idea of like war and bloodshed. But that's what I do think that if you're just generally interested in this concept, the Romans take that and run with it. Their goddess of war and bloodshed is called Bellona, and like Bellona, like that means war, basically. Like bellicose is like, all of these things are coming from this idea of like war and bloodshed. So if you're interested in this, I would go look into Bellona, because she's going to be more explicit, because the Romans were more interested in like those kind of elements in their storytelling, but also in like just in their culture. And there's a lot of like different reasons about that, right? The Greeks are looking from a little bit more of an ancient perspective in this case, and so they're really looking more conceptually, whereas the Romans are from a period, and their writing and things are from this period where just things are a bit more literal and specific, and so you get more examples of this. Bellona as like a character. So yeah, if you're curious, Bellona is like an equivalent, but she's definitely more in the Roman than Enyo, who is just kind of this concept who's got a cool name. Okay, this one's from Connor, who says, I absolutely love the podcast. Thank you. Your political commentary and all the work that you do. Oh, God, thank you, especially. As an environmental scientist, I would love to hear your thoughts on how ethylene gas, which naturally occurred in their chambers, impacted the ancient oracles. I saw that one modern research team put a participant in a shed and filled it with ethylene to see if she would start giving prophecies. Knowing that the local geography might have impacted the ancient religion is fascinating to me, and I want to hear your thoughts on this story. Okay, it's a good question. I honestly don't. So the only thing I know about the ethylene gas theory about the oracle specifically is that it is related to Delphi only, and that it is not certain, because Delphi is so, I mean, as I said earlier, which is well placed, Delphi, side of a mountain. Greece, very tectonically active. Parnassus, very specifically, very, very, very tectonically active, right? And so, yes, ethylene gas is in the area, definitely now, or in like the times when they were able to test it, it's potentially around. That said, because of all of the tectonic shifts and such, it's my understanding of this theory that they're not 100% sure that ethylene gas was there at the time, because this is something where the environment has changed so much in the intervening like nearly 2,000 years that it leaves a lot of questions, right? And so, because the thing about Delphi that is also one of the things that I think everyone should know, and so I'll say it for what is probably the 5th time, but Delphi, we only rediscovered Delphi in the last century or so. Like, I mean, at the earliest, it was like very late 19th century. And the way that it was rediscovered required them to move an entire town, because Delphi it had like fallen into disuse around the time when Christianity was taking over. Thanks for ruining yet another thing. And so around that time, a bunch of earthquakes happened as well. And essentially, you know, it was, again, I think it was like stopped being used in like probably 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th century CE. And then earthquakes are happening. And so in the like 1500 years between then, when it stopped being, you know, used, and when it was rediscovered, enough earthquakes happened that the town was completely covered by rockfalls. Completely covered. And to the point where another town had been built on top of the ruins of Delphi. They had no idea that the ruins of Delphi were below. And so when it was found, they relocated an entire town and they dug all of this stuff up. And so that's just all to say, like, we can't be certain that ethylene gas was actually seeping out when the Pythia were actually predicting prophecies, right? And so I think it is a good idea, but I also think, I don't know, I don't love it as an idea because, I mean, I think that there was more to it. I think that there was more to the Pythia, the oracles, all of this than a bit of gas, like unintentional drugs. I think it's very possible, but I also think, I don't know. I think it's more interesting, but that's all to say. I think it's a really interesting theory. I haven't thought too much about it. I've heard a lot of like back and forth about just how convincing this theory is. And I haven't done, I guess, enough research, but I do think it's generally really interesting. And at the very least, it led me to tell you all a bit more about Delphi itself, because I think that is so interesting. Like, I think it's more likely that there's like, I mean, maybe some gas as well, but I also just think that this site and Parnassus in general and the area was so tectonically active, so, you know, sort of in a world of its own, both, you know, the altitude and the location and the like view. Also Parnassus is like heavy, if I think it's limestone, whatever it is, it's like red. And so Parnassus is just sort of like a world of its own. And I think that maybe ethylene gas played some kind of role, but I also just think that there's so much coming from the general environment, the like nature of that place, that maybe it's all coming together to turn into these prophecies of whatever kind. But either way, like, I think it's one element of what is all around just like the most fascinating ancient quote unquote mystery. I don't think we have to think about it as a mystery. I just think it's generally like, oh, I'd like to learn everything, but the science stuff escapes me, I'll be honest. Okay, I only have a couple more questions left. If I'm not wrong, I only got like one voice question. And so what I'm going to do is ask you all to ask a bunch more questions, whether they are in text form or voice. And I'm going to do another of these episodes in just like a week or two, and I'll put the voice ones in there. Hopefully I'll have more, but logistically right now, all the text ones are right in front of me. So we're doing those, and the voices are going to come next time. Sorry, but also everyone give me more of them. Okay, this question is from Henry, who says, "Hi, Liv. I submitted a question a while ago, but I'm not sure it came through. But in case it didn't, I'd like to reiterate my gratitude for your podcast. I've listened to it through my last years of high school and just finished a few months ago, and I'm going into my third year of uni, and you've taught me so much. I've been a comforting voice in midst of tough times. Thank you." Okay, so many nice things there. I'm sort of jumping through this message, but the question is, have you watched Immortals 2010? I found it to be a pretty awful adaptation of myth. I think it was attaching Theseus to the wrong story. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Secondly, what are the meanings of some of the names in reading episodes? I'm glad you asked this. I've heard Lucifer mentioned a few times. Would you be able to explain who this is and if it has any relation to the Christian Lucifer? Thirdly, I'm going to Greece for the first time. Do you have any travel tips for a young person solo traveling? Also, are you able to give us a little explanatory tour of ancient Greece with the names they mention in epics? Sorry for so many questions. No, not too many questions. Thank you. Lots of love from Australia was the ending, and I appreciate that. Okay. No, this is a good question. I'm going to try to answer the three little bits pretty quickly. So, Immortals is terrible. Immortals is hot garbage in a way that, like, I don't think that I can properly put it into words. Immortals as a movie resembles Greek mythology in, I would say, okay, so it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I would say there's one way that it actually resembles any Greek mythology, and that is the names. I think that's it. If I'm not wrong, there's like almost no. I feel like maybe there's some like Perseus in there, maybe. I don't know. I forget all the plot, honestly, because it's just absolute hot garbage. All I remember is that there was this moment where there's like all this fucking rebar, and you're like, okay, cool. So, like, Hephaestus has really, like, upped his game. What do we mean? Are we building a skyscraper? Where's the concrete? No, it was just, that's all I remember. But also that it is, in name, the story of Theseus. But in detail, not anything at all. It's garbage. Hot garbage. Okay, that's it. Okay, the second question, Lucifer. No, I'm really glad you asked. This is one of those things, like, when I'm reading these, there's so many times where I'm like, oh, I wish I could explain this, but, like, it's in a reading episode, and I don't want to just, like, go on and on and on. So I'm glad you asked, because if anyone ever has questions like this, I would really love to answer, because there's a lot of really interesting things. And Lucifer is one thing that I have thought about a lot of times and thought, oh, how could I easily explain this? But like, just contextually, it's never worked out. So thank you. Lucifer is a star. It's just a star. Or, okay, having actually looked it up after I said that, it is a planet that looks like a star. No, so the origin of the word Lucifer, very specifically as that word, it's Latin. It means light bringer, and it is just the planet Venus, but like as a character god thing. It's a bright star. And so I think, okay, I don't know Christian shit, which is for the best, frankly. But I think it's coming from eventually getting turned into Lucifer of like fallen angel hell type situation, because of the whole, like, it's a star in the sky, maybe? I don't know. It's basically, it's a Latin word that predates Christianity, and it just refers to like the star that is the planet Venus. Which also kind of confuses me, because I feel like it's always been associated with like a goddess, but I don't know. The Romans are weird. But essentially, I think when it's used in readings, it's maybe just referring to like the bright star or something like that. But it's, yeah, like completely, like, I wouldn't say unrelated to the Christian Lucifer, because the Christian Lucifer is based on the more ancient word of the Roman Lucifer, but the Christian one is like, has all of those overtones, undertones, whatever tones. And this was just a star. But I thought about it every time I've had to say that word. So thank you for asking. Oh, another one, actually, because I've just thought of this. And in case people are curious about this, but Vulcan, so like Hephaestus, the Greek, you know, the Roman similar god, very similar, but different god, is called Vulcan, but he's also called Mulciber, which always makes me think of something Christian, and I don't know what. It sounds like it's a demon or something, but Mulciber. So if you ever hear me say Mulciber, that's also Hephaestus. I've sometimes tried to like teach my brain to say Vulcan instead, because it's just confusing. And similarly, Ares, in the Thebaid episode, Ares was regularly called, typically in Latin and Roman, we would call him Mars, but a lot in the Thebaid, he was called Mavors, which is like, I guess, a more ancient other Roman name for the god that in the Greek we then call Ares. That's not to say that the gods were the same, as we all know, but in the case of the reading episodes, typically it's like a Roman version of a Greek story and all of that. But that's all to say, yeah, Mulciber, Hephaestus, Lucifer, a star, the Morningstar, and Mavors is Ares or Mars. That's not even like the half of it too, because the readings so often like refer to people by the grandfather or their father's name, and so I'm like, oh gosh, it must be so confusing. But everyone seems to love them all the same, so I'm always perpetually thrilled. But that's all to say, like, if people have more questions, I'm really happy to answer them. Okay, we have only 2 more. This one's from Brooke, who says, "Hi, super big fan of you and your podcast. My question is related to your book, Nectar of the Gods, which my fiance got me for Christmas. Oh, thank you. I know this was written several years ago now, but is there a reason there's no Hecate-inspired cocktail? Also, if you had to create one, what would some key ingredients or flavor profiles be? So much love for what you do and how you do it. Thank you for everything you've created to teach the world and me about Greek myth from a delightfully feminist POV. Thank you." I need to read more of that stuff and actually take it in and remind myself that I'm not a failure at everything. Okay, so it's a great question. Yeah, I don't really know why I didn't do Hecate at the time. It was so long ago, and honestly, with that book, like, it was very sort of like rushed, and the way it started was they were like, can you give us a list of titles? So the very first thing I did is just like brainstorm quippy cocktail titles, and so it ended up being that, like, I feel like I ended up missing a lot of characters that I would have liked to feature, purely because it was more about trying to come up with like a quippy name that would like then work for a cocktail, you know? It was such a weirdly specific book, and I absolutely love it, but also like it was just bizarre. So no, I don't know why I didn't, but I think it was just a matter of me being like, okay, what's like a clever cocktail and how can I make it, like, you know, mythic? And Hecate, I guess, didn't come through, but it is kind of disappointing. I also, though, did have to rein myself in from too many like blood themed cocktails. Because the other problem was like having too many things that would be like really similar, and I joked at the time like a real cocktail book of Greek myth would be just like wine. So, you know, it was just a matter of like what I could come up with something. And I guess Hecate didn't come to me at the time, but it is a bit disappointing. I think now maybe she'd have like I'm thinking maybe like a mezcal. Like I want like something like smoky, and also I love Hecate and I love tequila, so that's my answer. Yeah, like something mezcal-y and smoky and like warm and angry and strong. That's what I got. Okay, and last one, which I think is a delightful way to end it, and actually really appropriate for Hispanic traditions for New Year's, I think, if I'm not wrong. Anyway, this one's from Marcos, and he says, "Hi, Liv. I listened to your episodes with Ellen Zakos, and I've been wondering something. During the section about pomegranate seed, Ellen said something about fruits with lots of seeds being a fertility inducer. Do you think this connects with the fear men had of the Maenads? Grapes typically have 2 to 6 seeds per grape, according to a very rudimentary Google search." Thank you for your very rudimentary Google search, because that is so interesting. And yeah, I fucking bet. I don't know. I mean, they were just so afraid of women, but I think they were like maybe the fertility stuff, but also the way that the drunkenness, right, made women scary because they were like, you know, unpredictable, I guess. And they could like tear you to shreds with their bare hands if they get a little too drunk. You never know. But no, I think that that's like a super likely connection to be made, and I love that I now know how many grapes are per grape, which that's a lot. So that checks out, like a very seedy. The thing about pomegranates too is like they're so visibly seedy, but grapes, like you can find them in there. I feel like also we are also used to seedless grapes now, but like they would have been really obvious and like big back then. No one's breeding out the seeds. I like it. I like any reason to speculate on why the men were so afraid of the women and made our lives what they are today. Thanks. But at least we can figure it out. That was a really great way to end it. Thank you, Marcos. That just a delight. Thank you all so much for listening to this very rambly Q&A on this very cold first Friday of 2026. I feel like I blinked and 2025 just happened to me. I don't fully know if I experienced it. I think I have autistic burnout, but I've never been diagnosed, and I just don't know how to exist in this brain. So I'm working on it, and thanks for coming along for the ride, I guess. I really hope to be doing more new episodes soon. The book is going to be, finished in a few weeks. I'm afraid of that, but it will be. And so hopefully I'll be back. I really want to return to the love and joy of this show and my work, because I still love the topic and the work so much, but I just I don't know who or what I am at this moment in time. It's fun. Late stage capitalism, am I right? Doing great things. Let's Talk About Myths Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Let's get the hell out of here. Michaela Penguish is the Hermes to my Olympians, my incredible producer. The podcast is part of the Memory Collective podcast network, which will exist in more forms soon because of things. Who knows? Select music by Luke Chaos. And listen on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, or if you want ad-free episodes and so much more, check out the Oracle edition on Patreon, patreon.com/mythsbaby. Yeah, we have ad-free. We have lots of fun bonus stuff. And Michaela's doing on Wednesdays we read books. It's so fun. We're having a great time over on Patreon, and mostly loving life ad-free. So join us if you feel like it. Otherwise, thank you for listening here or wherever. And I'm gonna stop saying words now because I don't think they mean anything anymore. I am Liv, and I love this shit, and I really, really love you all for these questions because they really helped just in general. Thanks.